Okay, I'll confess, I started this podcast just so that everybody could listen to my song, the intro song that's playing right now. I started it so that I could get exposure finally as a producer and a musician.
Has it been working?
No. Fuck no. We've had, dozens of people listen to this podcast and not a single person has mentioned the fucking song.
I think it's only a matter of time.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a record label will be like, oh my God, that mental health podcast is the coolest intro of a song ever.
We gotta start targeting like mental health issues that record label people might be experiencing. We can really key into that demographic a little bit better.
That's what this podcast is going to be now.
Yeah.
It's going to be for artists.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Hello, listener. I'm sitting here with your therapist, whom I married. We're trying something different today. Today we're sitting down. We're going to talk about... We've been getting into very specific mental health topics over the last couple of weeks, really. I want to take a step back, look at the whole life cycle of therapy. Because for some people, it is something that begins and ends. It is not an ongoing thing that lasts forever. So with that, my name is Price, and I married your therapist.
Hello, I'm Ash, and I'm your therapist. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, it's not the same thing as therapy or a substitute for it.
And it's a great source for hot new jams.
Probably the top source for hot new jams.
Yeah. Okay. So, something that definitely came up for me when I was starting my own therapy. And I'd imagine you'd get this sort of question a lot from folks is, how long am I supposed to be here receiving therapy? Is this an ongoing thing that I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life? Or is this something that we can start and overcome specific things and then there's a conclusion to this, right?
Yeah. I think... Are you wanting me to answer the question now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, give us an overview.
I think that... my answer to this is really that it depends. And I think we'll spend the rest of the episode talking about how it depends. It can depend on the sort of modality that your counselor is using. Some counselors are very solution focused, and they are going to be really zoomed in on one specific issue. You're going to be talking about that every single week and really getting through that. And then when that's done, therapy's kind of done. A lot of therapists kind of do see therapy as something that's in and out, always going to be a part of your life. Maybe even not with that same therapist.
The cynical part of me is like, this motherfucker's trying to get as much of my money as possible. They don't ever want me to get better.
And that's a fair thought. And if you start feeling like that's happening, maybe you're with the wrong therapist.
Yeah, maybe. You'll never heal here.
Yeah. And it can also depend on resources. Obviously, therapy's expensive. If you go through, therapy that's with your work or your insurance, you probably are dictated that you can only have a certain number of sessions within a period of time, right. A year. And so all of those things are going to factor into how long therapy lasts.
So you're trying to tell me that therapy works on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah. That's really going to be my whole message. I feel like I could not show up to any future recording and just be like, well, it depends.
Well, everyone, I appreciate you tuning into this episode.
In the office where Daryl pre-records that, oh, what a crazy turn of events thing. Yeah. I could just pre-record this. It's well, it depends. It depends. People are individuals. That's really my mentality in general when it comes to therapy.
But I think that, yeah, people are individuals, but also, especially if you're just getting into it or thinking about going to therapy, it's give me an answer. Is this supposed to last forever? Or is it supposed to be something with a finite beginning and an end? Let's talk about the difference, because I know that if it depends, let's talk about the specific circumstances that could lead to one or the other. So. Sure. What is an example of somebody who might go into therapy and really benefit from a short term, a few months of therapy? I'm going to start and that therapeutic relationship is going to end in a few months and I'm going to have grown and accomplished what I wanted during that time period.
Yes. So something somebody might go to therapy for is a life transition. So maybe you've just made a move, you've just started a new job, you've just gotten into a relationship, you've just started school, college, something like that. Your kids have just moved out of the house. Something in your life is fundamentally different now. That might be a reason that you start going. And probably in a case like that, if otherwise your life is like pretty happy, you feel pretty good about things, you're not really struggling with a lot of stress or anxiety outside of that, but now here's this big new thing, that might be one case where you go to counseling for a couple weeks, a couple months, get through this transition, get some support, learn what your life is going to look like moving forward, and then go back to living that like happy, healthy life you already have established for yourself.
Why would you go to therapy if you're already happy, though?
Well, I'm saying that prior to the event, you're already happy and healthy.
And now a specific thing has changed.
This specific thing has happened. You're stressed. It's a big deal. Or you just want to like understand what this new phase of life is going to look like better. So you're dealing with this finite issue. That might be another thing where, for instance, maybe somebody goes to therapy because they've had like a car accident and now they're having trauma specific to this car accident. It's hard to get in their car and drive again. Yeah, absolutely.
People are like, I can't drive anymore because I'm so like freaked out.
Yes. And again, I think kind of the defining factor here is going to be that person, otherwise life has been good. They're really not experiencing other issues in their life. They don't have any sort of ongoing thing.
Mm-hmm. So they're able to point to like a specific thing and say, this has got me fucked up.
Yes, I was in a car accident in October. Since October, I cannot drive. Or I get super anxious every time I drive. And then you go into therapy and you're dealing with this one issue.
Or my kids have moved out and they've all gone away to college and I just don't know what... Like, I'm feeling really bummed and having a difficult time to just navigating day-to-day life right now.
Yes, I just need some support to identify, like, who I am and what I do during this new phase of my life. And then you go back to living your life, but now you've adjusted. So that is one reason that therapy might be really finite.
So in that situation, you're helping the client overcome that specific issue. If somebody comes in and is saying, hey, this is what I want to talk about, now I want to limit it to this, Are you pushing for more? Or are you going to like, okay, yep, this is all we're talking about, and even if you say something that like raises a question about like, oh, you might have had a really difficult childhood or something like that, do you really leave it to like what they're saying, or do you, as a therapist, is it in your purview to try to dig further and really help them? You know, like how do you balance that?
I have 2 words for you. It depends. Okay, so
I should have fucking known, dude.
I know. So it does depend. How tied in to this issue are those other things? So if somebody starts kind of wanting to explore that stuff, we can start talking about that. Maybe you are dealing with your kids having left the house and it's bringing up old abandonment wounds that you have lived with, this like, maybe you waited for the perfect family to come along or to be able to build your own because your family growing up wasn't perfect. And you did have the perfect family. Honestly, everybody was pretty happy and healthy. You had a good relationship, and now your kids move out and suddenly it's like, oh my God, my family's falling apart. Here I am again without the family that I always wanted. What do I do? Okay, now we're probably getting into some deeper, older stuff that we're going to explore.
Right.
And so maybe that's a clue that there's more to talk about.
I can just imagine though, like, okay, so you're in a car accident in October. Tell me about your father.
Okay, so that is the thing that I try to avoid. Now, I think that there are a lot of benefits to getting to explore that stuff, but I've definitely had clients who come in, car accident happened in October, now I'm struggling to drive. I'm good if that's the only thing that you want to talk about. We don't have to also talk about your parents and your family. Now, I have some like intake questions that are going to generally cover those things, but
those are like biographical and universal. Yes. You ask everybody the same.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Everybody gets the same initial sets of questions, but if that's really not your goal for counseling, I personally feel it's none of my business as a therapist to try to poke at those other things. Now, if they're starting to naturally come up and that person is starting to feel some concern around them or noticing some concern, okay, well, now therapy's taking a little bit of a different trajectory than we initially expected. We thought we were going to be talking about car accident. Now we're talking about your dad. But when clients come in and want to be focused on a single topic, that's great. Those are honestly really fun sorts of clients to work with because we're so honed in on a certain issue. They're probably starting to see progress really quickly because they had such a firm foundation going into it.
Right.
And we're getting to stay really, again, fixated on that until they're on the other side and noticing real change. And it's like a great easy win for both of us. Like, oh my gosh, life was good. Now something has changed and it's tough. Now things feel good again. Wow, now I've learned a whole new part of myself. I've learned that I can overcome this thing. And they're on their merry way, and that makes me so happy. That's so great. It's certainly not my goal to keep somebody in therapy forever and ever when that's not a benefit to them.
Conversely, you have somebody coming in who's like, I'm feeling bad.
Yeah.
I feel bad and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And that could be an exhausting process, or at least it was for me, of probing and like trying to figure out what was wrong, what was going on.
Yeah.
And it wasn't very satisfying for a long time.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking kind of like 3 ways that could go, right? Somebody comes in and says, I'm feeling bad and I don't know why. I've never felt this way before. And that is either true or false, that they really have never felt that way before. Things have been pretty good leading up to it, and they're not sure what's caused the sudden change. Or they've had one of those childhoods that your trauma response is to kind of press on and imagine that, one, have that trauma belief that like, this is just how things always go. This is normal. I deserve these things. And you've had to like shove that down. And so that's when you might start to have that unveiling of, oh, there was more there. That's definitely more of my experience, and the experience of a lot of people is coming in going, I feel bad. I've never felt this way before. Nothing bad has ever happened to me. And then kind of going, oh, shit, a lot of bad happened.
Right. And that's where the fucking money is, right? You get to see them for years. You really drain every cent out of them. That
is such a weird thing to say.
I'm on to you.
No, that's one of the horrible, inaccessible things about counseling is that I do think that therapists like deserve to be paid for the work that they do. And there are so many circumstances that therapists find themselves in where they're not hardly able to make ends meet. They're like working another job at the same time as being a therapist or doing other things. It's a specialty. It's like going to see a doctor, going to see a dentist. These services like are more expensive. And at the same time, there's this weird overlap where like we're serving really vulnerable people who have other difficult things going on in their life. Often there's an overlap with lack of financial resources. And that's a really hard thing as a therapist, is to you want somebody to be able to move through and get on the way. And so also if therapy isn't necessarily ending, if it doesn't have a finite like end date, maybe you're doing other things to, okay, now we're on a check-in basis. Now you're meeting every other week. Now you're coming once a month, every couple months, which I think is totally appropriate and fair to do. And then maybe you only pick up the pace when another big issue happens, something else comes up, now you hone in on that thing, and then you go back to checking in, or maybe not going to therapy for a while, but still having that contact information.
How do you know when it's time to start dialing back or even to stop therapy altogether? If you don't have, I'm not coming to the table with a specific issue that I can articulate. Mm-hmm. I'm feeling bad. Things are not going well. How do you know as a therapist when it's time to start taking a step back? And would you as a therapist ever be the one to make that suggestion? Yeah,
a lot of the times what people don't know is that often, for better or for worse, therapists aren't the ones who make that suggestion first.
Okay, so the therapist isn't the one that's going to be like, okay, you're better, we're wrapped up here, you're all good. Nice knowing you.
Yeah, I mean, again, therapy is so individualized, but also so client led that, like, you're the expert in your own life. You're the one who knows when you're like, hey, I'm feeling good. I'm starting to feel this sense of like wanting to move forward out of therapy. So often, again, for better or for worse, I think that there are times where it should be the therapist who says it, but the client that it's time to move on. So a couple of ways that might come up is that you start running out of things to talk about in therapy. You were on track, you were going through things. Each week you were focusing on different topics or covering the same topic again. And you start to get to the point where you just kind of show up and you're reporting that things are fine. Or this thing happened, but then I implemented these skills. I validated my own feelings. I did this thing. And that kind of internal voice that you've had to fight your whole life has started to be a helping voice. It started to remind you of, you know, what's true and what's good and your strengths, and kind of the things you've been learning in therapy are now externalized to the rest of your life. So that's a good sign that things are kind of moving forward that way. And that usually is when I, as a therapist, will go like, how are you doing? Is this still helping you? Are there more things we can cover? And so that's a point to either switch directions, or maybe that's time to start talking about terminating.
How do you distinguish between a client who actually doesn't have much to talk about because they are doing better, and a client that, as we've discussed before, is really holding back? Is not really willing to go there, you know? So they're coming, they don't have anything to talk about, but they have plenty to talk about,
yes.
You know?
This is probably a new issue. It's probably new that it's come up. If somebody from the beginning is struggling to talk in sessions, that to me is an indicator that they're having a hard time sharing something. That there's a reason they came, there's a reason that they signed up, but probably they're starting to struggle, or they're struggling right from the start with really sharing things. If things have been going well, if usually we do fill whole sessions with being able to talk about stuff, and suddenly we've gotten to the point where there's much less to say, that's where I'm going to check in with that person. How are things going for you? We'll start talking about things that we talked about early on. You know, I remember when you first came in, we were talking about these things. Where are you at on them now? What's that like in your life? And sometimes they're very aware that it's different. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we have the conversation, they're like, oh my God, I am in a different place with that. I never think about that anymore. I don't really do that anymore. And then maybe we're having the conversation again about, okay, well, are there other things that we can be focusing on? Are there still things that are holding up your life that are keeping you from where you want to be? Or are you maybe wanting to slow down sessions? Would you like to switch to every other week or once a month? Or, and sometimes, yes, that's what they want to do, and they maybe do that a couple of times, and then we end up ending. Or sometimes they're like, honestly, I think I'm good. Like, okay. And part of our code of ethics as a counselor is kind of having an open door policy, is making sure that we end that last session, that termination with, know that you can always reach out. Know that like things might come up and change, and that what I always say is, if you want to start sessions again, we will. Or if you want help finding a new therapist, maybe next time you come back to therapy, you're dealing with something that feels very different and you no longer feel like I'm the best fit. I want to help get you connected to those resources. I'm happy to do that.
You used a term that I've heard before that I find deeply hilarious. The last session is called a...
termination.
A termination.
Yeah, we do a termination note.
Why is it called a termination?
Because the counseling relationship is terminating.
But you also have an open door policy. Like, come back anytime, but this is terminated.
Yes. Well, it's because on our end, we're doing something different. There's sort of a protocol that we follow around terminating. So if somebody is letting me know that they want to terminate their sessions, which is a word that no client has ever used.
Hey, actually, I think it's time to terminate this.
I think that a client comes and says, I'm ready to stop. I'm ready to stop counseling. I think I'm ready to be done. There's kind of a protocol to follow. So if we know that kind of early, I'm thinking I'm getting close, then we're starting to plan out, okay, what are the major things we want to make sure we cover before the end of this?
Okay.
And so then we're really working through those things succinctly kind of in those sessions. Or maybe they come and they're like, hey, today's the day, and that's the first notice I'm getting. Often I'm getting that notice for the first time at the very end of the session. Also fine. That's okay. But
great session. Appreciate
great
you.
session. I think
not
I'm
going to
good.
reschedule for next week.
To be fair, these were mostly college students, and I get it. That's okay.
Yeah.
But when they're saying that that's time, the reason that it's terminating is one, because there's a protocol kind of that we follow in terms of making sure that they know about the open door policy and that they feel set on the skill set that they have, and they kind of have a plan for the future. What's going to happen? How will you know if you do need to come back? Those sorts of conversations. And then I'm doing something called a termination note. And it's a very specific note where I'm kind of documenting across the life of our sessions and saying, here's how many times they came in. Here were the initial goals that we set. Here's kind of how we did or didn't achieve those goals. And then maybe something about, and I offered resources or I did some sort of support. But it's because there's a process. It's not a normal session note that we're doing.
Okay. I still think it's funny.
I didn't realize that would be funny, but I completely agree.
Well, it depends.
It depends.
So, if I'm contemplating going to therapy and I don't really know what the issue is, and I'm speaking, that was my experience. I was like, everything's just turning to shit. I don't know what the problem is.
The world's crumbling, and yeah.
What goal setting is? You mentioned that you set goals with your clients. What does goal setting look like for somebody who doesn't know what's wrong? Because if you know that you can't drive anymore, the goal is pretty obvious. I want to be able to drive again.
Yes.
But if you don't really know what the problem is, how do you help clients set goals in that context? So
therapists can be divided on goal setting. In some sorts of therapy, it's very much around goals, and especially when insurance is paying for it, but every single week we're coming back to what are those goals? Are we still focusing on those goals? We don't really talk about things outside of those goals. We're very goal driven. And then that's tough because you really are having to create these very solid, measurable sorts of goals. And then other therapists, especially therapists who work with neurodivergent clients and clients dealing with trauma and that sort of thing, yeah, of course it's hard to define goals. So that's a really normal experience. The spiel I sort of give during my first session with somebody when we're supposed to set goals is, what do you want to see different in your life because you came to therapy? Is there anything you want to change? And that's much easier for somebody to say, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to feel like the world is gray.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like I'm drowning. I want to feel like I have a better handle on things. I'm good with that. That's just kind of, where do you view yourself now, and what do you hope is or isn't present in your life in the future?
Now, when you've had clients who have very specific goals, it must be the best feeling in the world to see them get there.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like? What's the process like for you as the observer, as the professional?
Yeah.
When somebody has less clear goals, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. That's not a very tangible thing,
Mm-hmm.
What do you see unfold over the weeks and months that you're working with somebody in that sort of situation?
Yeah. Well, we're probably working to get more insight on, how is it that you feel now? What is going wrong in your life? Why is this the point where you're coming to counseling? What finally hit that tipping point for you? And then getting to dig down into some of the roots of those issues. So not that we necessarily go back and rewrite those goals, but we're just getting a lot more information about what is this way that you don't want to feel anymore.
Just putting language around that. Yeah.
And just putting language around that can do a lot for somebody. Can make the very vague, indiscernible situation that they're in feel so much more tangible, feel so much more like something that they can finally wrap their head around and get what's going on, and probably start to see the pattern or the roots of where those things came to be. Oh yeah, that thing has always been a part of my life. I've always worried about this. So that's a huge portion of it. I'm personally, as a therapist, never concerned when somebody does not have measurable goals. That is okay. I'm not worried about the vagueness of it. But yeah, it would be identifying kind of where are we now. And then maybe also looking back into the past, has there ever been a time where you felt the way that you hope you feel again? Did that time ever exist for you? And if so, what was that like? And let's get really into pinning down what it was about that time that was good, that did work. Maybe it was something in childhood. Maybe it was the first time they had like independence, whatever it was. Like, what was it about that feeling, that time and place that really captures what you want again?
If I don't like the way that I feel now, that implies that at some point I felt better before.
Yeah.
So we're able to talk about it in that context, right?
Yes. And maybe there were still issues back then, but usually there's some sort of state that they can describe. Or maybe they do have this indistinguishable future that they imagine. And then we said about, is that realistic? For instance, a lot of my anxiety clients come in and they might say, I've been anxious my whole life. I want to have zero anxiety. I don't want to feel anxiety anymore. Well, the bad news is that that's not realistic. Your anxiety has served a purpose to you. You're always going to have some sort of anxiety, but it doesn't have to run your life. But it can be something that you befriend instead of something that shows up and disrupts things. It can be something that comes less and less frequently. It can be something that when it does appear, you know exactly what to do with it.
Yeah, I think that anxiety kind of gets a bad rap. Anxiety plays a very important role when it's functioning the way that it's supposed to.
Yeah.
When it's working the way it's supposed to, it is a good thing. So many people have anxiety disorders, though, and they feel it all the time in overwhelming amounts. And that's like, yeah, water is really healthy for you, but you can also drown in it,
right.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. That it serves a purpose. It's a sign that your brain is like doing what it's supposed to do. But yeah, how can we have it no longer run your whole life or feel like it's present all of the time, or that when it shows up, you don't know what to do with it? So sometimes it's not that they can even name a thing in the past. It's that they have a thing in the future, and then we're assessing, okay, what does that look like? Is that something that can happen? Or do you have this really high expectation of yourself that one day you're never going to make a mistake in relationships? You're always going to have the perfect things to say. You're never going to have anxiety. You're going to feel perfect every single day. You're going to only be on the happy upper end of emotions. Like, no, we're going to embrace all of those things. That's all a part of life. So just resetting kind of those goals can be a huge shift in somebody's life.
Now, what sort of folks would you say definitely, you would anticipate them having a long-term or perhaps permanent relationship with a therapist, and that they're probably in it for the long haul?
Yeah. I think...
I'll go first.
Okay.
I have bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
I really struggle from a couple months of being manic and a couple months of being depressed. And the mania is getting a little easier to deal with. It's the depression that is still kind of hits pretty hard. And I kind of lose interest in being alive. And so having a therapist that I see every other week or every month, really helpful to me to stay grounded and focused on my own well-being.
Yeah.
And that's something I've kind of resigned myself to as being an important part of my self-care sort of regimen.
Yep.
But that's a decision I made for myself. Nobody pushed me to that,
And that's always going to be the important thing, is that you as a client felt empowered with the decision to stay or not stay in therapy.
Right.
That it's never my business to tell somebody that they do or don't need to stay. We might talk through, okay, what does life look like without therapy? What does it look like with staying in therapy? But that at the end of the day, even if I think, oh yeah, we're still getting a lot out of sessions, and you're like, it's time for me to try this on my own. Okay, I'm here. That's allowed. I want to empower you to feel like you're making decisions in your life. That's one of the most important things we do as humans, is have a sense of control in our life. And if it's helpful to you to go, nope, there's a finite and okay, let's do that. But yeah, definitely if you've got something recurrent, that's probably an indicator that at least off and on you'll be in therapy for the long term. I think that people who have brains that just in general don't fit in well with the world, if you're neurodivergent, you're always going to be encountering stuff in the world that just does not work for you. That just was not set up to accommodate you or to like embrace you in the beautiful, wonderful way that you function. That's probably a sign that that person is going to continue wanting some sort of outside resource so that they can keep coming back to that reset. I'm not broken. The world isn't built for me. Here's how I continue to function in that. It doesn't mean, again, every single week you need to be in therapy for the rest of your life, but you're probably going to want some sort of long-term relationship with a therapist so that you know you have a place to go back to. It's also nice to have a therapist who knows your history, who you can go back and just get started. It's like an old friendship where, you know, the friends who you can call once a year or every couple of months out of the blue and just catch up like nothing happened because they know you. They know what you're like. They know why that thing was significant. I love hearing from a client a year, 2 years down the road. I remember the things that we were talking about. I'm amazed to hear about the way that things have changed in their life and the progress that they've made. Or they come back to counseling at that point, and now we're dealing with a new set of things. And that feels very good too. It's nice to see somebody down the road and again to kind of have that long-term relationship. So when you've got a recurrent issue, when you've got something that just like I think doesn't fit in well with the way that the world works, the current systems that we have in place, that's going to be something. If you're facing like regular oppression or persecution in some way in your life, like that's going to be one of those things that wears on you. And I think in general, if you're somebody who knows that there's been some history or pattern there, maybe you've dealt with long-term like child abuse or an environment that wasn't safe for you, that's probably going to keep coming up in some way or the other. That you get into a new relationship, or you are starting something new, or you have to end something, and now those old wounds are kind of coming up. So those are kind of some examples of what might happen. Again, it really is very individualized, but that's probably a good indicator that you might want to have a long-term relationship with somebody. If you're, again, just going to therapy for, I was in a car accident, now I'm struggling to drive. Okay, now I can drive again. And you had never had anything before that. Okay, cool. That probably is it for you.
So I think that we're going back to the non-answer, that it's really up to you what that relationship looks like. And your therapist is going to be there to support that journey.
Yeah, that again, a good therapist is all about empowering you to be in the driver's seat of your own life. That we all have so many experiences that, you know, put us in the passenger seat, that make us along for the ride of what's happening in our brains or in our world or in our relationships. And your therapist should be empowering you to feel in control of those things. So at the end of the day, I don't think that there's necessarily a right or a wrong choice. See how it feels. Like that's something that I talk to my clients about all the time, is they can feel so frozen with decision making. And it's like, oh, that's okay. The important thing is that you get to make a decision. And then you pay attention to how it feels. So if you spend some time out of therapy and like things continue going well and you're like, wow, I have really gotten a hang of these tools. That's a great sign that it's okay for you to spend time away from therapy.
That means it worked,
Yeah,
right? Your therapist
amazing.
helped equip you with tools that help you
Yes,
navigate your
yes.
life well.
Yeah.
This is good.
That's the goal. That's what we're looking for. I'd love to always be working myself out of a job. Oh my gosh, I love watching a client like go through the process of like graduating therapy, so to speak. Like, okay, I did it. I figured out this thing, or I now have enough tools that when stuff comes up, I'm already implementing them. When I get to therapy, I'm talking about my life in a past tense. Because I'm like, yeah, this thing happened, pulled out these tools, did this thing, reminded myself of this thing, and on I went. Okay, amazing.
My sessions with my therapist are like 50-50. Like, I'm 50% of the time like, yeah, smooth sailing. Did great, had this issue, dealt with it like this, and she's like, that's great, see you next week. And then sometimes I'm like, all right, so I haven't showered in like a couple days.
Literally none of it's working. Everything is terrible.
Yeah. Why am I here? I don't want to do this anymore. And she's like, you feel like this every 6 months, bud.
Yeah. That's the having somebody who knows you and can be in it for the long term. I think that you don't have to be in therapy every week to have like an ongoing relationship with your therapist, so that every 6 months you can come plug in.
I think that you can get a lot of value out of a therapeutic relationship pretty quickly. But God, there's something about, like you said, somebody who knows you well.
Yeah, and think about it. I kind of hate this analogy, but maybe I just hate car stuff. But like the way that you go and like get your oil changed and get your car tuned up, like things are going well, they're continuing to go well, but it's helpful to have those check-ins. When else in your life are you getting the chance to really sit down and observe yourself? Maybe you want to do that every couple of months. Maybe every so often you do want to check in and see where things are at, even when things are going well. Sometimes it's the only chance the clients are really getting to like celebrate their success. They don't even get the chance to realize how well things are going, how different their life is.
Right.
Than when we're like sitting there talking about it. And that's a great thing too. But I know statistically that clients are the ones who usually mention terminating counseling. I am very frequently like, okay, what am I here for? Like, look at you, you're doing it. And I love that. I want to be the first to call out when like you are starting to do this yourself. If this is useful to you, amazing. Let's keep going.
You're not looking to keep somebody in their shit, right? You're helping to move them through it. And by extension, work yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
Which, as your business manager, is a terrible model.
I'm so sorry.
Fuck.
But yeah, and then I think that there are some clients who will always want to be in counseling. You and I are both people who always want to be in counseling. I think as a counselor, I feel it is very important to me to always be in counseling. But I think a lot of people view it that way. And I think that that's great and valid too. Again, it's that you felt like you got to make a choice in it, that you have a say.
I think that goal setting is important too, even if you're doing therapy long term. Whether you know exactly what you want at the beginning or you're further defining what you want. I don't know why that just works for me so well.
Yeah.
You're
very goal oriented.
I am very goal oriented, but that helps me like see a direct line of value between the therapy and the things I am doing to reinforce what I'm being told.
Yes.
And being able to like measure those outcomes in my life and see that, oh, I am making progress in the things that matter. Yeah. And I am like happy to say that the things I'm struggling with now are better than they have been, you know, and there's still a struggle, but it's not as bad as it was years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think ongoing goal setting, regardless of whether or not we're actively saying like, okay, what are your goals for the next 6 months? But that should be an ongoing part of counseling. And again, I try to do that as a therapist. When I notice that things are slowing down or they're starting to talk about things in the past tense, as like this did happen, but here's how I dealt with it, that I'm kind of redirecting that and going, okay, that's amazing. Look at this. I'm also a historian as a therapist. Like, I remember when this was different. Let's take a moment to celebrate that change. Yeah. But then what are some new areas of focus? What's our direction?
Yeah, I remember when your boss was rude to you and it like destroyed your whole week.
Yeah.
And now it's something that you just brush off your shoulders, you know, something like that. It seems very pertinent to me, those sorts of things, you know?
Yeah, it feels so good to have somebody notice and remember those things in you, and to also be able to reflect like, yeah, that used to destroy my whole world, and now that's something that I can deal with effectively. I know what to do. I know how to place that in my brain and to move forward. Yeah, I love that. I love those moments in counseling. I love a nice long-term relationship as a therapist, but I also love somebody who's like moving forward and feels ready to terminate sessions. I think that that's a great place to be too.
So with a few minutes left, what are your thoughts on this topic as a whole, where we've talked a little bit about like the life cycle of therapy, starting it and ending it, and the different contexts that might happen in? As a therapist, what is success? What is a successful therapeutic experience or a successful client experience?
You should notice change and growth in your life. Your life shouldn't be the same with therapy as it is without. Like when those two start to be one and the same, that's probably a good sign that you're more than ready to move on. That you miss sessions for a couple weeks or something happens and like nothing changes because you're really in a steady place. I think that therapy should continue impacting you in that something is different. You're getting a different perspective on something. You're noticing progress in your goals. You used to experience this, low mood or stress or anxiety this often, and now you're noticing a change in that. Things should be feeling easier and different. Obviously, at the beginning of therapy, sometimes things feel a lot harder before they feel better because you get all that awareness around what's really tough. But I think that it should impact your week to go.
Right.
I think that when it stops doing that, you might be with the wrong therapist. Or you might have hit a point where like, no, you've really kind of done the work that was needed and now things are, but stagnation is going to be a big sign that it's kind of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to measure it, and that's really on you as the client to make that determination. Yeah.
Are you continuing to be like positively impacted by this in some way, or are things feeling like you go to therapy and absolutely nothing's different? And if you've just started off, if you still have goals you'd like to reach, but you're noticing you're staying stagnant, maybe the wrong counselor, or maybe you need to talk to them about that directly. Hey, I feel like I'm stuck. What do I do?
Right.
What can we change?
Yeah.
Sometimes they just don't know that that's happening, and that's normal.
Oh, you're not mind readers?
Not mind readers. That's kind of the assumption.
Yeah.
It would be helpful to be, but we're not.
Reminds me of Anchorman 2, when the psychiatrist who's dating Veronica under Ron Burgundy's, or behind Ron Burgundy's back or something like that.
Yeah.
He's a psychiatrist, and Ron Burgundy's insisting the entire movie that it's like, I know you have mind powers. I know, like, that you... And then it cuts to him at the very end, and he's like, got telekinesis, and Ron Burgundy's like, I knew it!
That would be a great little party trick, but no, it's not what we do. So maybe your counselor doesn't know that you're feeling stagnant. If so, it's a good time to talk to them about that. But yeah, when you start getting to the point where you're running out of things to talk about, or you're noticing that it's no longer really having an impact, like that's probably a good time to move on, or to talk to them about termination. Surprise them with that word.
Well, I am so glad that we got a chance to chat through this. I think this might be the only mental health podcast with a fat Anchorman 2 reference in it.
Yeah. Sick jams.
Sick jams, fat beats.
Great Anchorman references.
Great Anchorman reference. Well, speaking of sick jams, let's go ahead and get this rolling right now. I appreciate getting to sit down with you and taking a wider view of the therapy process. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
And we will see you next time on I Married Your Therapist. This song fucking slaps.
What if you're like really offbeat when that happens once you add the song?
As I was doing it, I was like, am I gonna like sync this up? You know? Probably not.
Oh well.
The song slaps though.
Yeah.
All right.